And the person that was reading the set aside prayer at the start of each session would read it, and then somebody would come and tell them that this prayer that they were reading about remaining teachable and open-minded was the wrong one, and it wasn't right. So they kept coming up with different versions of this prayer about open-mindedness because the one she was reading wasn't the correct one. So that always makes me laugh to think about that. So here's the version I'm going to read, and it's maybe not the right one. God, today help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about others, and everything I think I know about my own recovery, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me see the truth. Amen. And then Kevin likes to read. As you know, this book is our book study is called the Fourth Dimension Big Book Study. So there's two places in the Big Book that talks about being rocketed into the fourth dimension. The first one is on page 8, and it says, I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And on page 25, it says, we have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not ever dreamed. And that's that. So last week, I believe we wrapped up on the resentments part of our 4-step inventory. And so we would be picking up today with fears. Same thing. We're going to have our pages and divide up our columns and all of that, but we will be on page just one sec. It would be the bottom of page 67 was where we left off last week. It says, so we've gone through, we've looked at this table. We've seen that, that he was resentful at, for instance, Mr. Brown. We looked at the causes, and it affected him in a different way. But notice that fear was bracketed in there a lot, right? In how he was affected. So it says, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble, right? So fear is, we have a lot of problems with fear. When I'm dealing with my resentments, all of my resentments happened in the past. And, there are things that have happened or that I think have happened. They didn't necessarily happen. There are things that I'm a thought might have happened, but there's things that I'm replaying in my head over and over. And I'm feeling that pain over and over again, right? My fears are all based in the future. My fears are all based on me being afraid that I'm not going to get something that I want, something that I deserve, something that I think I should have, or that I'm going to lose something that I have, right? And so my fears are all based in the future. I have a friend that says I've wasted more of my life clearing away the wreckage of my future than any single person should do, right? And so so my fears are all based on, and in a lot of ways, it's not trusting in God or in my higher power to know what's best for me. It's when I think I know what's best for me, and I think I know what I need, right? And I have a misguided, whacked out view of what I think I deserve or need to survive, right? I get very confused between what I need and what I want, right? And so that's where my fears come into play. So this next paragraph is going to tell us, sort of about our fears and how, it's going to tell us what our columns are, right? So number 1, fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them, right? So that first column is what's my fear? What am I afraid of, right? What is the fear? Second column, we asked ourselves why we had them, right? Why do I have this fear? What is it that I'm afraid of? Third column, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great confidence, but it didn't really solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse, right? So wasn't it that self-reliance failed me? That's why I have this fear. How am I relying on myself rather than my higher power or my God? Um, and that and in this situation that makes, like, what, in what way is it that I think I'm controlling this, or that I think I can control this situation, rather than trusting in God, right? That same guy that I just told you about, also says, like, when he has fear, it's like low grade atheism. It's not trusting God, in that area of his life, right? So when, when I have fear of our financial insecurity, it's me thinking that I know what I need to survive, in the money department, when really God knows what I need, right? I that's where I confuse with what I think I want, right? I want to have all the nice things and the big house and I live at a lake and people have $150,000 wakeboarding boats and all of that kind of stuff, right? Like, and so that's when I have a fear, it's because I'm relying on self and I'm not trusting in God, right? And it's as simple as that, right? To me, that's what it comes down to. So it says self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there's a better way. We think so. For we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying on God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role he assigns, just to the extent we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. Right? So it's a reference back to the third step and that play of life, right? Where God's the director and my job is to play the role he assigns me, right? And if I play that role he assigns me, and rely on him, for the outcome of that, rather than me trying to control the outcome, it says he will match calamity with serenity, right? He will match all that craziness in my head going around and all that stuff with serenity, because I'm not trying to control the outcome anymore. I'm not trying to be the director anymore. I'm trying to be the actor, and I'm not trying to write the outcome of the play. Right? Does that make sense? So we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength, right? If my fear is removed from me because I rely on a higher power, or because I rely on God and I trust in God, that's where I get my strength from, right? It's not a sign of weakness to lean on God and to have faith. It's where my strength comes from. Where's more my right? The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear, right? So in that fourth column on the bottom half of the page, I write out, with my fears. So I in the first column, I identify my fear. The second column, it's what is it? Why do I have this fear? The third column is how am I relying on myself to try and this self-reliance? How is it not serving me in this situation? And then in the fourth column, I might write, God, please remove my fear of financial insecurity and direct my attention to what you would have me be. How can I be of service to others, right? When I have these fears, so then I'm going to go through and I'm going to have, one fear per page, just like our resentments, right? Does everybody remember how we did it? I don't have a whiteboard out or anything, but so we're going to have these 4 columns and we're going to go through and we're going to do all these prayers. I'm going to have some fears that are going to get removed right away. Some of the, like Kevin will call them the 5-cent fears, the small ones, right? The small ticket items, and I'll start to lose those fears right away. But I'm going to have some big ones that aren't going to go away right away, right? And so I want to go through this list every day when I'm at this point, and you know, say this prayer for each one of my fears. And if I feel like it's gone, then I can kind of check it off, right? If it comes back, I need to pray about it again, right? But I can kind of check it off, and I'm going to find there's going to be some on that list that aren't going to go away. So I'm going to teach you a trick I learned on how to deal with the really, really big fears where I pray for them. And, when they don't go away and I still have this fear. And I'll tell you, one of them is financial insecurity. And so I'll teach you a really good trick that I was taught. If I take this financial fear or if I take a fear, then I'm not being relieved of this fear. If I try to think of what is for me, if this fear were to come true, if it were to happen, what is the very worst possible outcome for me that could be? What would that mean, right? So let's say it's financial insecurity, and the very worst outcome for me might be, I you lose your house, lose vehicles, I've lost a job, and all those things happen. And then here's a big part of it for me: all of those things, being homeless, being on the streets, all of that stuff, are all part of it. And then there's just a few certain people in this world that if they found out about it, that would be they would get so much joy out of it that would be crushing to me, because I care what people think about me still for some reason at times. So I think about that, and if that's the very worst outcome for me, and this is the key part, then I don't pray for that to happen, right? I have to be careful what I pray for, but I pray to accept that result if it were to happen. I pray to be accepting of that. And if I can come to terms with that, where what I think is the absolute worst outcome for me is in that, whatever that fear is, and if I can come to accept that outcome, if that outcome happens, I'm okay. But guess what? What are the chances of that outcome happening exactly all the way to the very worst way I could imagine it, right? So anything short of the very worst possible outcome for me is a win for me, right? So I didn't, I didn't lose everything. I don't lose everything, right? I have not all the fancy things that one might want, but that's a huge victory compared to what the very worst outcome possibly could be, right? So it's very important, though. Don't pray for that outcome. Pray to be accepting of that outcome if it were to happen. And if I can accept it, then I'm in way better shape. Does that make sense? Yeah. Does anybody want to talk about any fear stuff? Like, we're gonna have some time to kill, so I don't know if we want to dive into the. I mean, we still have the sex inventory we can do yet tonight too, but does anybody have any questions, comments? I understand the 4 columns. Um, any anybody want to talk about any of it for a minute before we move on?
Yeah, when I'm doing my fear inventories
Yeah.
and with sponsees too, and when I first started and still now, like I have trouble understanding how self-reliance failed me. Like I understand, okay, it's because I'm not relying on God. Is it just as simple as that? Is it just because I'm like I've got a big fear of death or infidelity, like being cheated on? How has self-reliance failed me? Just because I'm not relying on God, and like I sometimes I have trouble grappling with it. What do you mean?
Yeah. So it's absolutely as simple as that, but it sounds simple, but it's not as simple, right? And so, um, Alex, in your case, let's use the example of somebody cheating on you, right? Um, you're so fearful of that happening, and you're trying to, in your mind, stop it from happening. If you were to trust God and it were to happen, it would be, God's plan for you or God's will for you, right? And you don't know, like, that's one piece of the puzzle. I have a friend that he was in a relationship, and he didn't know where the relationship was going. And he prayed for an answer as to where that relationship was going. And within a week, he came home and all of his stuff was packed on and out on the step of the house. And I mean, that sounds like a pretty bad outcome, right? 2 years later, he's been married for 10 years. He's got step kids, grandkids, married to the love of his life, right? And so I think I know what's best for me. So in your case, you think you know what's best for you. And you're not trusting the results of your relationship to God, right? And sometimes we go through some of the very worst things of our lives to get to the other side where the most beautiful thing in the world happens. So it's a
Yeah,
hundred
that's
percent of the time my fear is I'm not trusting God and I'm relying on self-reliance in one way or another.
I like that. And that was helpful to hear it that way. Sometimes Kevin also says for that part, I know he says uh like he frames it as how is relying on like alcoholic Alex failed me.
Right. How's relied on what you broke up?
On how's relying on alcoholics Alex failed me.
Right.
How has relying on self, because self-reliance, that's relying on alcoholic Alex or
Right.
something like that, Kevin has said, maybe, unless I'm just making stuff up.
I'm not sure, but I know, like,
Yeah, I'm confused.
in really simple terms, every single time that I have a fear, it's because I'm not trusting in God. I'm trying to control the outcome myself, right? So it's trying to understand how I'm trying to do that. Scott, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Brad, this is just my own experience. Similar to what Alex was saying there about like sort of trusting myself, is we say probably no human power. Well, I'm a human, so I'm probably trying to do it on my own power. So that's
Right.
my maths version of taking it. You know what I mean? So the things, it isn't necessarily my alcoholic thinking or my alcoholic me. It's I'm human power, and I'm trying to resort to my own human power. My experience would be I mean, I've gone through cancer twice. I've recently got through a big deal of last 2 or 3 years. I'm all clear now. 2011, I had testicular cancer and I was in a hospital in England. And I'd had an orchidectomy and I didn't even know I had a pair of orchids until then. Right. So, and that's one of my distractions from fear is basically my humor. You know what I mean? It gets me through a lot. But I woke up the morning after the surgery and you weren't allowed to use your phone on the wall. And I only had one bar on it and it was a Nokia 3410. It's before smartphones and all the rest of it. Probably still got one bar now, amazing phone. And the guy in the bed opposite me basically choked on his breakfast and died. Now the thing is, he was near death anyway. Now I'd seen death in my drinking and using, but this was different. I don't know why it was different, but it was different. And I'd gone through the steps, I'd taken the steps. But in hindsight, it's very much an academic exercise. But in this moment, it was like I knew I couldn't call anyone. There was no one to call. And it was the first time I sort of put because my first step three was turn my will and life over to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. That's how I process for me. And the first time I really put my hands together and I went, help me out here, I've got problems. And I just got this feeling, like it's not a white light moment, or you might think it is, it's going to be all right. Not Scott's going to be all right, but it's going to be all right, whatever it may be. And thus far, it has always been all right. My problem has always been ever since is when I was going through the cancer, the last time I was fearing what my wife would do when I passed, you know what I mean? Had I made provisions? Was my will up to date? What about this? So the thing is, I'm very pragmatic and practical. But the thing is, when it actually comes down to the deep down bit, it's like, it's going to be all right. I might not be part of the it, but it's going to be all right. You know what I mean? And that sort of gives me some sort of solace. And I might be straw clutching here. And sometimes I think you need a straw to clutch to. But on my own power, probably no human power, I'm going to live in fear. I'm petrified of my own self. But I have to play my part. I mean, as I've said prior to the meeting, I've gone to sort out some more treatment, which is, again, I wouldn't call it homeopathy, I wouldn't call it New World, but I'll definitely call it different. It's not drug related, it's not Medicaid related. They're going to take blood out of me and put it back in after it's been centrifuged, do this thing. And I'm open minded about this stuff to come to a solution. But the bottom line is, like, you know, if it don't work out, I've got to live with what's going on. Now, I know most of these fears for me has always been about health. I've got a lot of it. I've had a lot of health issues. But look at me now. I'm coming up to 57 years old. I'm 15 years sober. I'm living on the other side of the world. I've got a happy relationship. I've got everything I ever wanted. But sometimes the thing is I have to look for my purpose is to have contentment. My purpose isn't to be happy, because as soon as I'm happy, I'm not happy enough, or he's happier than me. But if
Yeah.
I'm content, in that moment of contentment, guess what? Happiness is a byproduct. Contentment makes me happy. Then all of a sudden I've got enough. It is enough. I am enough, and all those things. You know what I mean? So the thing is, but it's just basically being able to take a step back from that and realizing that what have I got to do next? And am I going to? I'm going to walk around in perpetual fear if I don't just sit there for a minute and go, "It's all right. It's going to be all right." I'm almost like put my arm around myself, metaphorically, if that helps.
That's awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Scott. And Michael has his hand up, and then let's move on to sex conduct if there's nothing else after that. Go ahead, Michael.
I am Michael. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Michael.
Something, Brad, that you said, I wrote it down because it was just profound for me. The things that I thought may have happened. The things that I thought may have happened. I imagined that they happened, but they probably didn't or might not have. That's incredible. Instead of trusting in your higher power for what you need. And it's much like the phrase I heard before, that expectations are resentments under construction. If you're going to think something is going to happen your way, and you've got it all planned out and it doesn't go your way, then you're going to have a resentment and you're going to have fear because of that, and it's going to lead you down a path you don't want to be. So what stood out most for me was, for we are on, or we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying on God versus what I think I need. When I have fear, it means I'm not trusting and relying on God. And especially the part where it says, if you do have faith and trust in your higher power, he's going to give you serenity that matches calamity. I don't quite understand that. If you could expand on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So calamity is just, I mean, I saw Rob put a definition of calamity up here somewhere, but calamity, adversity, misery, something that causes great loss and pain, right? So that's how my life is when I'm running this self-managed life, right? When I think I'm trying to be the director, my life is full of calamity. It's full of pain, right? Like mine was anyways, right? I have all of this stuff going on in my head. I have all these resentments and fears, and I'm living this life of calamity. If I start to trust in God and I turn over these fears and I let go of them, and I have this faith that God will provide for me what I need, which is different than what I want, and I get rid of these expectations, right? I heard a similar thing: expectations are resentments waiting to happen, but I like that they're under construction as well. I like that better. Um, then God will then match that calamity that's going on all up here, right? It's all in my head for the most part. God will match that calamity with serenity. So he'll, like, think of it as he'll replace it. You're muted too. I can't, if you're talking, I can't hear you. But
I'm sorry, someone's smoking marijuana outside my window, and it's like coming in and making my night miserable all of a sudden, but I'm going to pass it over to my God. This is a little bit wild and crazy right now.
right.
It's my whole room has just turned into a marijuana den.
Yeah.
Oh,
So does that part make sense though? If like you could think of God will replace that calamity with serenity.
and
Right?
a lot of that has happened, and that goes along with the ninth step promise that we will know a new peace, a new a new serenity.
Right.
I think that's what it. I think that matches up quite well with that, and that has happened. That has been my experience. That I'm no longer suffering as much as I used to over anything, because I'm relying on a higher power more. And I'm saying, thy will be done, not my will. and I'm turning things over, just like I'm doing in this very moment. I'm saying, Thy will be done, not my will. I don't understand why this lesson is happening at this
Well,
moment where,
I'll tell you what, that's the thing about these lessons is, like I said, I gave an example of a friend of mine and this relationship he was in. Many times, we don't ever get to know the outcome of what we're going through, but God uses us to be of service to others in ways that we will never know or understand most of the time.
yes. So God, please help me understand.
All right.
And let me know serenity versus calamity.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Brad.
Ollie.
Yeah, bro, I just got a quick question with the sheet that Rob just put up, the fear sheet. I got all of that step one to column 1, 2, 3, 4, but at the bottom it says the deeper level is that even if blank, and then it says rely upon God. What would go in there with a fear? We gotta get robbed.
I think that's what I was talking about, right? Even if the worst outcome possible for me were to come true, I will rely on God. I will be okay and use this experience to help others.
Got you. I get
that's what it's about, Rob. Yeah. Okay. That's how I take it, Ollie.
okay.
And
I could
that's
understand that.
Yeah, that's Page's, that came from Page. And,
okay.
but which is part of your group anyway, so that's why I put it up there. So people can see it and follow it a little bit easier, because I know you don't have the whiteboard today, so.
Yeah. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is just like resentments, Rob posted a link in the chat that would take us to a list of a 4-step inventory sheet, so that I'm going to go through and I'm going to list all the fears I can think of that I have, and then I like to do the exercise. People just say, here's a prompt sheet, pick which ones are yours, like whether it's resentment or fears. Personally, and this is what I get my guys to do, is I like to actually go through the exercise of trying to think of them myself first, and then I use the prompt sheet when I run out of ideas, just to go and see what I've missed. And I will get some off the fears prompt sheet every time that I never thought of, for sure. I'm better at remembering my resentments than my fears. Yeah, and then that that little fear prayer that we talked about. I'd be walking into a meeting with our management people, and I have bad news, and and it will be, God help me remove this fear. Help me be open and honest and truthful, and don't hold back, and make sure I share all of the bad news. Don't try and sugarcoat it. Don't exaggerate. All of those things, right? And I can walk into that meeting ready and not be worried about what their reaction is going to be to the bad news that I have, whether it's we're over budget or whatever it is, right? And so I use that prayer all the time, right? Because I go through a lot of fear every day, right? It's that thing, and that simple little prayer, helps remove those fears. So that's that. Let's move on. We are now at the bottom of page 68. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cries that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices that cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. I love the line that it isn't the right kind. I never really understood that one too much. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to, right? So what we're really talking about is, in this world, we have this broad spectrum of people and their beliefs on sex, right? And at one far end of the spectrum, it says that sex is only necessary for procreation, right? To keep the human race alive, keep having babies, so that there's the human race doesn't just die out and and go away. And the other end of the spectrum is that we should have sex and more sex, and sex is the answer to all of our problems, and don't worry about marriage and all of that stuff, right? And so we have these two very extremist viewpoints, but most people are somewhere in between, right? And it's saying, what we're saying is, we don't want to probably take a lot of advice from people that are extremists in one way or another, right? And they say that people have no flavor for their fare, right? F-A-R-E. Fare back in this day and age, in 1939 and this time when the book was published, a fare would be, you'd go to a restaurant and a menu was, this is the fare of the day. This is what the restaurant served. It was the fare for the restaurant. And so what they're saying is, we'd have no flavor for our menu. We'd have nothing but very bland food on one side, right? And then on the other side of the extreme, that says we'd have a straight pepper diet, right? Where we have very spicy food, and it would be, we'd have very spicy sex life. So there's, they're just giving some examples, and those are the two extremes. It says, we want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct, right? It's not up to us to decide somebody else's sex conduct. We do want to be the arbiter or the judge or the, we don't want to be trying to place our sex ideals on somebody else, right? It says we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past, right? So now here we're back to our page, our 4 columns, right? Divided in half, column 1, 2, and 3, and then column 4 on the bottom, right? And so it's going to give us our 4 columns right here, and they're a little bit out of order in this paragraph. So first, it's going to give us column 2. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate, right? So in column 2, it's where was I selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate in this relationship, right? In column 1, whom did I hurt? Whom did we hurt, right? Column 3, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And column 4, where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper. Same thing, column 1. I go through and I list all the people, 1 per page, right? Once I get that done, column 2, where had I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate, right? So did I have any dishonest behaviors or inconsiderate behaviors? Was I concerned about their feelings and what they wanted out of this relationship, or was it just what I wanted out of it, right? Was I controlling and manipulative in this relationship to get what I wanted, right? And then column 3, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness, right? So did I did I cause any of those things? But Kevin has just recently been talking about, and this is way new to me, did I unjustifiably arouse any of those things in myself, right? So did I get all worked up in my head that I was jealous over nothing, right? Did I unjustifiably get suspicious of my partner in my own imagination, right? Did I do any of that stuff? And that's kind of, I'd never considered that before. I've only just considered, what did I do to arouse jealousy and suspicion for my partner, right? And then where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it, right? So I'm going to give you an example, because I've been talking about it for forever, and it doesn't bother me to talk about it anymore. But I would have told you before I did this that I was the most faithful partner or husband on the planet, that I'd never ever cheated on anybody. And then I went through and I did this 4th column, right? And every person on my list, I was like, this person. And then, where was I selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? And that part was pretty easy. And did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And I'm going to tell you what I learned doing this column. I was absolutely faithful in every relationship I was in until I decided I didn't want to be in it anymore. and I was too full of fear and cowardice to end a relationship. So I would just start a new one and not tell you. And eventually that aroused suspicion, jealousy, all of those things, right? I got divorced over things like that, right? I had relationships that ended over things like that, where I was in a relationship for 1 or 2 years and decided that I didn't want to be in it anymore. And so I would just start a new one. And eventually you would find out, and then you wouldn't think that I should, that was very good. So what I really found out is that I was unfaithful in almost every single relationship I was in. But in my mind, I wasn't, because in my mind, the relationship was over. But I never ever formally ended it or had the grown up discussion, right? Because I was much too cowardly for any of that. That was a hard discussion to have. So let's just avoid that and start over with a new relationship. So it was a very, very eye opening thing for me. Very eye opening. And then where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? Right. Well, I was at fault just in that example by, not being fair and honest, and, having the conversation with my partner that, maybe this wasn't going to work and we should move on, or whatever. Right. And I was very cowardly about it all. So we got this all down on paper and tried to look at it. Right. So make sense? So in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. So the big part of doing this and is I want to understand how I behaved in my personal, intimate relationships of my past, because I hope to see where maybe I fell short, and where why every relationship I'd ever been in had 100% failure rate, right? And so that I could then shape a new sex ideal, right? And so what we're saying here is I'm going to evaluate every one of those relationships, and where had I been selfish, where had I been self-seeking, where had I been self-centered, and I'm going to develop a new sex ideal, right? And so this comes back to, we don't probably want to get advice from either one of those far extremes on the straight pepper diet or the no flavor for my fare, right? I want to come up with the sex ideal that makes sense to me, and and in prayer with God, right? So we ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. So I have my guys literally write out what an intimate relationship would look like to them going forward, and we're going to try to live up to that ideal now, right? So things like, I say, if your sponsor comes and asks you what your sex ideal is and you can't just spit it out, it's because you don't have one. You haven't done this part. I think this part gets missed an awful lot, and I think it's hugely important, right? And I think it gets skipped all the time. I need to know what it is I'm working towards. So we remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed, right? So as I'm coming up with these sex ideals, that sentence has an awful lot of power to it, to me, right? Sex is God-given. Sex comes from God. Sex isn't dirty. Sex isn't unnatural, right? Too many people, I think, and I have this biased opinion in my head about where it comes from, but too many people are raised thinking that sex is a dirty, dark, secret thing that is hidden away and is evil, right? People are raised to believe that, right? On the other hand, it's neither to be used lightly or selfishly, right? So I think of things in my world. How could I use sex lightly? Well, to me, that would mean like not actually getting to know the person. Maybe one night stands, or waking up and not remembering that other person's name, or those types of things, right? So I want to have this sane sex ideal somewhere between straight pepper diet and no flavor for my fare, and I'm going to come up with this ideal with God, and then I'm going to run it past my sponsor and let him know what I've come up with, right? I also don't like to tell my guys what my sex ideal is for me until they've had a chance to do their own, because I don't want to influence them. I want them to come up with their own, and then we'll share. I'll share what mine is, and they'll go, oh yeah, no, that's a good point, or whatever, right? And so I like them. Same thing. I always don't like to just give out answers in AA. I think we have to work for them, and so I like them to work for that a little bit. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it, right? Kevin and I have had a lot of talks, and he talks a lot about making amends in this part of our fourth step. And his current belief, and therefore my current belief, is that these are amends that we maybe we don't get to make, and for a couple of reasons. But I'll and if you think there's one, if I've got a guy that thinks he's got two that he needs to make, and when we get to the amends list, we're going to talk about it, and he can talk me into it if he can. But I can tell you, this is an area where I really struggle with what my motives are in making these amends. And sometimes we make amends to let ourselves off the hook, but we might still be creating damage in others. So I'll give you an example. Is I dated a girl for 2 years before I got married to my first wife, and I ended it badly, and I probably owe her an amend. But we are now talking 40 years later, 5 years later. I know she has kids, grandkids, happily married this whole time, lives this wonderful, beautiful life, right? Does she want to see me like this? Do I need to interject myself on her family, right? She's long over me, right? I'm the only one still thinking about us. She's long over it, right? One other example is, I spent a long time being single here, for a while, and there was one young lady I really wanted to make amends with, but my motives were not pure. It wasn't about. It was trying to rekindle a relationship. In my mind, is I'll just go make amends with her, and maybe we'll get see where that goes, right? And so they're really, really tricky, difficult amends. I think that if you're going to make them, or if they need to be made, we need to have really strong guidance from very strong sponsorship, and I'm not saying ever that there's none of these amends can be made. I'm just saying that we need to be really careful about it, and have really strong guidance, and lots of prayer and meditation on it, and then do what's necessary at that time. So the right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge, right? Like, I'm going to share my sex ideal with my sponsor, but God's going to be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid historical thinking or advice. So suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done, we have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience, right? So what they're saying again here, it's more of this progress rather than perfection. And if I stumble, am I going to drink? Not necessarily, but if I stumble the same way over and over and over again, every Friday night I go do the same thing and I stumble, right? It's not stumbling anymore, right? Like, you ask me, when I do something wrong, and I'm going to tell you I make a mistake. I made a mistake. Can I make the same mistake over and over and over again? It's no longer a mistake, right? It's a defect of character, right? A mistake is when I make a decision or do something based on not understanding and having all of the information, and I make a mistake. But once I learn from that mistake, it's no longer a mistake if I keep doing it. And if I keep calling it a mistake and doing that same thing over and over again, I'm not trying to progress towards that ideal that I made. And I'm going to drink again, guaranteed, right? So that's what they're talking about. So to sum up about sex, we pray for the right ideal or guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache, right? So just like everything else in our book, when all else fails, working closely with others will save my hide, right? If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. When I read that line, it also always reminds me that when I go to make my step 8 list, it's mostly going to come from my step 4, but there's also going to be people on my step 8 list that I need to list that I don't have resentment towards. I don't have, there's no fear involved and there's no sex conduct involved, but that I harmed them, right? And so they might not be on this list so far. So I always tell my guys, on your phone, do a little notes thing or whatever. And when it comes up, like I stole a chocolate bar at that gas station when I was in junior high, right? Well, I don't have any resentment towards that gas station. That gas station's been gone for 25 years. I don't have any fear of that gas station that doesn't exist anymore. And there's no sex conduct part of it, right? But I owe an amend, so it needs to go on my list, right? So that line when it says we listed the people we had hurt by our conduct, that's when I always tell my guys, you need to start making this list. By the time we get to step 8, I just want you to start writing them down as they come to your mind so that you don't forget about them when you get to your step 8, right? Because it's amazing what I can forget. In this book, I read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. If you have already made a decision, right, in step 3, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him, and an inventory, right, in this step 4 that we're just wrapping up, of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning, right? A good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself, right? This is the first time I'd ever done anything where I thought about and learned about me, right? I finished this and I went, my first thought in my head was, you're a selfish, self-seeking son of a bitch. And then I thought, I wished we all had to do this in grade 12, right? It's the first time I ever learned anything about me. So one last thing I just want to add about sort of this is, my resentments are my incorrect thinking, right? Resentments are things I'm thinking about over and over and over again. I'm replaying these things and these incorrect thoughts that I have in my head, right? My fears are my incorrect believing, right? I have these beliefs of things that are going to happen in the future, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? So it's incorrect beliefs. And my sex conduct and other harms are my incorrect acting, my bad behavior, right? It's my bad behavior. So those are just 3 things that I've written down here. And with that, I'm done. That's all I got. Thanks, everybody.